A few weeks ago, Japan made a dramatic move by placing more than 100 Chinese tech firms on a new export control list. Tokyo expected the usual response: criticism from Beijing, support from Washington, and then business as usual. Instead, something far stranger unfolded. Not long after the blacklist was announced, rare earth shipments coming from China simply stopped showing up. No warning, no explanation. One day, orders were moving normally. The next, the supply chain went quiet. In manufacturing hubs like Nagoya, car makers scrambled to secure magnets. Semiconductor companies checked inventories only to realize they had far less material than expected. Within a matter of days, it became clear that Japan's sanctions had triggered a supply squeeze that no one had planned for. A silent blockade created by overlapping restrictions from both countries. But this pressure didn't come out of nowhere. For most of the year, Beijing had been tightening its grip on the minerals that power electric motors, satellites, industrial robots, and missile guidance systems. Then in October, China added yet another layer of export controls. New forms, new licenses, new inspections. Suddenly, approvals that once took a month were dragging into the next quarter. The numbers told the story. By September, China's rare earth exports had fallen by more than 30% from August. Magnet shipments, the finished products needed by automakers and defense firms, plunged soon after a short summer rebound. Because China handles the overwhelming majority of the world's rare earth processing, every slowdown there becomes a crisis somewhere else. Japan's blacklist collided directly with China's new export regime, creating a feedback loop that tightened with every passing week. On factory floors, cracks appeared quickly. Suzuki's Swift production line in Shizuoka had to shut down twice between May and June. Suppliers quietly pointed to shortages caused by long approval delays in China. Only when shipments resumed did the assembly line restart, but managers knew the problem wasn't solved. It was only postponed. And all of this was unfolding during a political transition. After the resignation of Prime Minister Ishiba, Parliament installed Saita Kahuchi as Japan's first female prime minister. Within days of taking office, her administration announced an industrial revival plan centered on defense technology, AI, aerospace, and next-generation chips. But even as Tokyo shifted its strategy, Finance Minister Katsunobu issued a warning. China's increasingly strict export rules posed a real danger to Japan's economic stability, and the G7 needed a unified response. By late October, Japan and the United States signed a new framework to cooperate on nuclear energy and rare earth supply chains. A symbolic step, but symbols can't replace physical materials. China still dominates everything that matters: mining, chemical separation, refining, alloy production, and magnet manufacturing. Trading houses tried adjusting. Sojitz began sourcing heavy rare earths from Australia's Lynas facility in Malaysia, promoting it as a China-free option for sensitive applications. But even Sojitz couldn't fully avoid Chinese partners. Certain high-performance magnets and heat-resistant alloys still exist almost exclusively in China. That's the uncomfortable reality for the entire world. The rare earth bottleneck isn't in the mines, it's in the chemistry. The complex refining stages that China has spent decades perfecting and subsidizing. When Beijing slowed approvals again in October, shipments dropped instantly, and Japanese suppliers rushed to secure whatever material they could. Every sector, EVs, robotics, aerospace, defense hardware, depends on just a handful of elements that flow through the same Chinese licensing system. At the same time, Japan tightened its own export controls on high-end manufacturing tools, many of which are used inside Chinese chip plants. Beijing saw the move as another escalation, adding stress across both industries. Japanese equipment makers, already restricted in what they could sell to Chinese fabs, now face longer delays and more complicated paperwork, issues that could affect everything from maintenance schedules to next year's revenue. Just days ago, Japan's largest chip equipment supplier, Tokyo Electron, admitted that the new export rules were already hurting profits, even as AI demand kept the company's order book strong. For China, the most powerful tool in 2025 wasn't tariffs. It was paperwork, licensing, inspections, approvals. The Ministry of Commerce introduced stricter rules in the spring, and magnet exports fell to levels not seen since COVID lockdowns. A temporary thaw in U.S.-China relations over the summer helped ease some restrictions, but October's rule changes brought the squeeze right back. Analysts noticed something new this time. The updated controls didn't only apply to Chinese companies, they also affected foreign manufacturers using Chinese materials or Chinese machinery, giving Beijing influence deep inside global supply chains. This matters everywhere. From the EV factories of Aichi to the aerospace clusters of Ishikawa, China now controls close to 70% of rare earth mining, around 85% of refining, and roughly 90% of magnet production. From raw material to finished motor component, China is the dominant force. For Toyota and Denso, The consequences are unavoidable. Without elements like terbium and dysprosium, high-performance magnets can't survive extreme heat. Without those magnets, there are no efficient EV motors, and without Beijing's export licenses, none of those materials leave China. Inside Tokyo's policy circles, one conclusion is becoming impossible to ignore. Japan can feel the pressure closing in, and policymakers are rushing to secure a way out before another supply shock derails industry. To understand why, you have to look past the headlines and into the quiet strategic contest playing out between Japan, China, and the rare earth materials that power modern technology. Tokyo has spent years trying to build a safety net for its critical minerals. Funding has surged into new mining partnerships. Trading giants are backing overseas projects, and ministries are rolling out recycling systems to capture valuable metals from discarded electronics. On paper, this looks like progress toward independence, but the reality is far less reassuring. One of the few suppliers outside China, India, unexpectedly restricted rare earth exports in June. Officials framed it as a domestic security measure, but the impact was immediate. Japan lost a precious alternative source, and this exposes Japan's real problem. Even when the raw materials originate elsewhere, many of the most important refinement steps still take place inside China. Those extraction and separation stages remain the choke points, and Beijing controls them. As long as that's true, any Japanese attempt to diversify comes with an unavoidable dependency on Chinese permission. China has not been shy about using that leverage. Export approvals loosen and tighten with suspicious timing, usually around sensitive diplomatic moments. When Washington reached a small licensing understanding with Beijing, European officials immediately rushed to negotiate similar terms. Even major economies are finding themselves dependent on Chinese bureaucracy. Inside Japan, the anxiety is increasingly visible. China has reportedly pressured Tokyo to stop adding Chinese firms to its export control lists. Japan insists that the rules are tied only to national security and weapons-related risks, not geopolitics. But the business community isn't convinced the situation is stable. Manufacturers across the country, automakers, robotics leaders, and electronics companies are treating magnet inventories with the same seriousness they gave semiconductor chips during the 2021 crisis. The vulnerabilities are not hypothetical. A single motor component forced Suzuki to temporarily stop production earlier this year, revealing how thin the supply buffer truly is. The core of the problem remains unchanged. China is still responsible for refining more than 90% of the world's rare earths and producing nearly all high-performance magnets. When Chinese authorities slow the approval pipeline, Japanese factories feel the slowdown almost instantly. This has forced Tokyo into a two-track strategy. It is investing with the United States to build new supply routes outside China. Trading houses like Sojitz are importing rare earth materials from Australia's Lynas. Yet at the same time, Japan is still quietly coordinating with Beijing because some specialized materials simply cannot be sourced elsewhere. Not yet. By early autumn, reports from within China made it clear that acquiring new export licenses had become significantly more difficult. A fresh round of regulatory tightening soon followed. These shifts came just as Japan's advanced tech sector, especially companies like Tokyo Electron, found themselves pulled in opposing directions. Soaring global demand for AI-related chips versus stricter rules on exporting Japanese technology to China. Every decision feels like walking across a moving bridge. Despite the investments in diplomacy, the fundamentals haven't changed. China's dominance in rare earth processing gives it decisive influence over global supply chains. That's why the United States and Japan are spending billions on diversification, and why Europe continues pushing for guaranteed access agreements. Everyone wants to reduce dependence, but for now, China remains the gatekeeper. In early November, Japan's newly appointed Prime Minister, Takaichi, made supply chain security her first major initiative. She ordered the creation of an economic strategy headquarters to map out long-term plans for semiconductors, defense industries, and advanced materials. Ministers have been instructed to prepare detailed development roadmaps for every critical industrial sector, but none of this changes the immediate reality. Japan's national security measures and its industrial needs are pulling in opposite directions. To protect itself, Japan is expanding export controls. To keep its economy functioning, it still needs materials refined inside China. Beijing, meanwhile, continues to use rare earths as a strategic pressure valve, reminding the world that the transition to clean energy and high-performance electronics still runs through its industrial machinery. When all the analysis is stripped away, the power dynamic comes down to a very simple question. When a Japanese factory needs a high-strength magnet made with materials that pass through Chinese processing plants, who gets to decide whether that shipment is allowed to leave the port? That signature, more than any speech, policy, or alliance, is where the real authority lies.